Yes, and let's kickstart this panel. Like, please give 1 to 2 sentences, give a punchy description of your product, like please. And also, if it can add one more sentence to describe how you differentiate from each other on this panel would be great.
Yeah, I'm Rushi, co-founder of Movement Labs. Movement is a modular move execution layer, so think Aptos and Sui, but coming to Ethereum via modular execution. I think what we differentiate is we focus more on the execution layer, providing an alternative to the EVM that we all know is broken, but no one wants to do anything about it. And here we are doing something about it.
Hello everyone, my name is Alvaro Fernández. I'm COO at Lumoz, and yeah, from our side, probably just to provide the key differentiation point would be the focus on the ZK side of things. So from inception, from our side, we've really focused on providing an agnostic approach towards offering rollups as a service from a ZK standpoint, and deploying what was the first decentralized proof network at the time as well.
Hey everyone, my name is Hilmar from Gelato here. What Gelato is building is actually not just a Rollup-as-a-Service platform. We call ourselves a Web3 cloud platform, and why and what's our sort of difference compared to others is we believe you need an end-to-end solution, and like a rollup or a database is just like one piece of the puzzle. So what we do is we provide out-of-the-box account abstraction, smart contract automation, access to off-chain data, and have like native integrations with a bunch of really great infrastructure services that you need on your rollup, such as oracles, for example, and yeah, believe in building this very end-to-end solution here. So I think that's how we are probably different.
Hey everyone, I'm Parker, co-founder CTO of Caldera. I'm usually the guy locked in the basement coding, but I think where Caldera is different is we have a heavy emphasis on, we do the table stakes stuff like infrastructure, but we ask ourselves the question, all right, we've got a rollup, how do you make it successful? And we think a lot of that lies in heavy customizations towards building out a rollup optimized for your application with the right narrative.
Hi there. My name is Amrit. I'm the Chief Operations Officer at Altlayer. We are one of the RaaS providers, but we do a bunch of other things. One is we offer a unique kind of execution layer that we call flash layers. So these are rollups that you can spin up, use them for as long as you want, and when you feel like you're done with it, you don't need this anymore, you can take them down. So that's the first difference. The second thing is we believe that RaaS services should be much more open, much more decentralized. So we are also building towards a system where you can pick and choose your RaaS provider in a much more open and decentralized way.
Cool, thank you. And also, like the second question is kind of a top-level question. Like for Gelato and Altlayer, they provide service for both ZK rollup and optimistic rollup. And Lumoz is only focused on ZK, and Caldera only provides optimistic rollup service. And for Rushi, like the question is like, why move ecosystem? And like for other panelists, like why only one or why both?
Yeah, I can kick it off. I think I'm a developer at trade, and it's always interesting, like the virtual machine stack has pretty much been the EVM for the last God knows how long. Yet Solana virtual machine also come up. But when I stumbled across Move, it's like, wow, Facebook put like $1 billion of research and it got stuck into like these two chains where no one's really using it. So the question is, like, how can we bring this $1 billion research built by the biggest social network in the world and bring it to the modular stack so that everyday users on Ethereum and your favorite chains can use it? And in terms of Move, for you, most of you who aren't familiar, it's built-in formal verification. Won't show it too much. Basically, it's the most secure and highest performance VM. And we want to bring it to Ethereum where there'll actually be users, liquidity, and protect against the hacker attacks. Every year there's $4 billion lost, namely in re-uncertainty bugs. Move is built by Facebook to address all these issues. Yeah.
Yeah, so from our end, the reason why we're really determined to focus on a ZK standpoint is when we look about the features that the developer teams and the clients essentially that are building with a RaaS tool, like the ones that we're providing, are building, is essentially what are those features, right? So if we're looking at it from a ZK standpoint, one clear point is compression that has to be denoted here. If you're building an application-specific chain, compression essentially provides quite a few advantages. We're talking about the cost comparison when you're relaying essentially data down to a base layer, right? But also if we're looking at the different types of essentially applications that would be building on app chains, if we think about what's essentially the customization levels that these different types of applications can obtain is really one of the features or components that we're clearly focusing from our side as well. But overall, if we look at settlement, for example, as well with ZK architectures, we're talking about in the order of minutes, or the closest towards basically atomic composability compared to different methodologies that are being utilized, right? So all these are different features that eventually not only those developer teams or applications that are looking to build, but essentially the users that are looking to utilize and benefit from such an architecture can also take that benefit home with themselves. Yeah.
Cool. So a question for me was, why do we support both ZKVM and OP Stack or optimistic rollups? I think, so in general, we don't really think of it as either or. It's really about what's important for the specific use case and customers, right? And obviously ZKVMs are cool, and ZK proofs are also cool. But at the end of the day, it's really what the user wants, right? And for example, if the customer wants a very cheap costs, then a ZK rollup is just not feasible for them, because proving is just still quite expensive, right? And we still need to get to a point where the difference between a ZK and an optimistic rollup is negligible, which is not the case right now. So there, I think a ZK rollup is not an option right now. So you have to also provide them with an optimistic one, though there are sort of ideas how to cut the cost down significantly over time. But yeah, we don't really want to make assumptions here. We want to help provide an overview of the benefits of every single system, and let the customer choose whatever they want to. And I think in general as well, I don't really think customers come into these discussions and thinking about the tech benefits that much. In reality, how it is, it's just a community thing. So they're like, hey, do I want to partner with the guys from Optimism, or do I want to partner with the guys from Polygon or whatnot? This is actually how it is. Yeah, it's just like an ecosystem and a marketing and BD thing at the end of the day, in my opinion. And it's cool, and so we want to be as open as possible to support all the projects from all the ecosystems.
Ooh, sounds like the first spicy take now.
It's the spicy rollup panel, right? So.
Yeah. So I guess from our point of view, I do not think that we are dogmatic about choosing optimistic rollups, but I think we are opinionated. That is not to say that I don't see the benefits of ZK rollups, but I think that our focus is really on how can we help our customers be successful, like right now, like get to market now, build out an ecosystem, build out a compelling product, build out a compelling narrative. And I think that the ZK EVM is going to be fantastic. But I think what's production ready is OP Stack, Orbit Stack. Where can we build customizations? I think OP Stack and Orbit Stack. But I do think that the ZK stack is going to be, ZK EVM is going to be where a lot of the industry moves. I think it's a great narrative. I think people, as Hilmar made the point, I think a lot of people are choosing these stacks based on what ecosystem they like most. And the Polygon team has done a great job capturing brands and providing a lot of value to teams, which is why that can be a very compelling option. But at least for ourselves, we are not so dogmatic about the actual technology itself, and want to just provide options that make sense, that are production ready, and allow us to build out something that works and something that will be successful.
By the way, we already have a Polygon production chain, so I will classify them as production as well. But
yeah, they're certainly production ready.
To add to that, I would say there are three main reasons why we support all the different tech stacks. One is, of course, the ecosystem closeness, because a project might come and say, or client might come and say, hey, I want to build in this ecosystem, I want to use certain Rollup SDK, and just help me with that. Okay, so that's one reason, and you have to support that. Otherwise, you would be saying no to a client that might turn really big in the future. So you don't want to do that. So you support different tech stacks for ecosystem reasons. The second thing is, in some cases, people come to you and they're not sure which stack to use because they're not really attached or tied to a certain ecosystem quite yet. And there they want to understand what are the differences, right? So what are the trade-offs and what are the challenges of different Rollup SDKs? And I'll give you some technical examples of why certain SDKs might be better for a certain use case. For example, you have a Rollup SDK like Arbitrum where your block time is dynamic, right? So your sequencer produces block as soon as you have you have a transaction come in. That may not be true for some other SDKs, right? Whereas there could be an SDK where the block time is constant. So you can change that. So you could say, hey, I want my block time to be 3 seconds, 4 seconds, but I don't want to be dynamic because I don't need that. So depending on that use case, you could say, hey, maybe if you're looking for this application, maybe you're looking for gaming application, you probably are better off in a certain direction rather than something else. And the third thing I would say is more like a readiness of the certain tech stack as well. Like, for example, in certain cases, even though CDK is live, there are certain things that you cannot make it work with CDK. For example, let's say Celestia famously is not quite there in terms of integration. They're working on it. It's not quite there. In OP stack model, you can actually go and use Celestia if you want it. So I think that's the third part, which is the readiness. And that's why you want to make sure that you support different tech stacks so that people can go and cover and get what they really are looking for.
Great. And like customization has been mentioned a lot. So my next question would be like, what would be your like biggest customization point, or like what's the most brought up customization point that you have heard from your clients?
Yeah, so I think at the VM level, the customization is just using anything besides the EVM. So far, we've onboarded some of our bigger gaming clients, and for them, they're like, okay, this single-threaded execution environment where I'm getting notched at like 50 TPS, and the DeFi protocols are getting hacked for tens of millions of dollars every year. They're just like, okay, what are the other solutions? Most people don't even know that you can bring other VMs and execution environments to Ethereum and modular stack. So that's the first step in our education of our BD, right? Like, you can stay on Ethereum, use the same settlement, have native ETH, use all the benefits of OP stack, ZK stack, whatever. But the benefit with Move and any alt VM is now you can customize how you're executing transactions. Now, instead of doing single-threaded, which is what the EVM is, you can execute transactions in parallel. What that allows you to do is address noisy fee markets. So let's say, for example, on Arbitrum, when gas really spikes during bull markets or periods of high use, the gas is extremely high to the point where A, it's either unusable, or B, it renders out like 30% of the market from actually using the chain. With parallel threaded execution, now all those transactions can happen concurrently, and there's no noisy fee markets ever. So gas is always stagnant at low points. Second thing is on throughput. We can notch up to 146,000 TPS in test. Obviously, in production, it's much lower, but it's still much, much higher than the 50 to 100 TPS max you see in the EVM. So when we're doing B2B and like understanding consumer needs, oftentimes gaming apps, consumer apps, and even DeFi apps, if you think about order books, they want parallel execution to address those noisy fee markets, as well as the gaming apps want next to zero gas fees, which is what Mutable is focused on, but they have a different business model. So when we're thinking about onboarding these next apps, I think execution layer is one thesis that hasn't really been tapped into, and now we're seeing Solana VM obviously go crazy, and we're addressing it from the Move VM point of view.
From our side, in our last testnet that we had open, our alpha testnet, without a doubt, the features that were the most demanded and quite well welcome were actually custom gas economies and gas exemption on gas frameworks for custom rollups. And it's because of two simple reasons, right? One, the user experience, especially if you're trying to onboard non-crypto native users. If you are able to combine something like a custom gas economy with something like account abstraction, you can think essentially of something like a Web 2 experience if you're talking about interacting with a game or interacting with a social platform, compared to what we've seen in the past with Web 3 gaming, Web 3 social, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that we've really seen quite demanded. But if I take a little bit of a step back in terms of custom features that I believe are quite robust from what we're building with our stack as it was essentially growing or getting more mature, integrating more ZK architectures and with more protocols essentially, was basically to have the ability to select whether you want to have a ZK sync type architecture, which is, let's say, providing better TPS results in terms of the scalability that you may be looking for. If you're looking for a more EVM-friendly environment, like what Polygon is essentially offering with their architecture, and being able to plug this ZK architectures into a custom-framed rollup and have a decentralized proof network essentially plugging in and proving that custom rollup on demand is one of the features that we've seen that's actually coming into fruition after the two testnets that we were having in the past.
Yeah, I think providers have to be careful not to go too deep into the customization rabbit hole here, right? Because the more you customize, the harder it will be to scale all of this. So Yeah, I think our way of how we approach this, we don't want to touch the actual like VM or implementation too much and stay as much as possible on the periphery, because the most important thing that we have learned is that you want application developers, like the rollup is just one small piece, like it's just like a piece of the puzzle, right? If you want to actually build user-friendly scalable applications, you need all these different tools that like this ecosystem is building together, right? From the SDKs to the wallets to the on-ramps to the bridges to the oracles to everything, right? And right now, for example, they're all EVM focused. So if you're coming in with a new VM, like okay. It will definitely have a lot of benefits when it comes to scalability and throughput, right? But there will be a lot of overhead of actually getting integrations to be available on there. So that's just like trade-off you have to like take into consideration in your go-to-market. So our approach is really, okay, how can we make it like our customers come to us and they want to build stuff with an account tracing SDK, social login, with the oracles, with the bridges and so on. And what we want to do is we want to make it as easy as possible for them to actually have them all on their rollup without actually having to go in and talk to too many people and convince them to support it. So basically having this end-to-end platform is our approach. And I think this is how you can actually provide developers with all the tools they need from day one. And then, of course, if they then scale to infinity, right, and they run into issues, then they should be thinking about, okay, do we need now parallel execution or these kind of things? But yeah, that's kind of like our approach.
Yeah, we are strong believers in customization here at Caldera for a couple different reasons. Actually, I want to give a shout out to Yija from Curio. He was actually our first user, just right there in the front row, that man right there. And what we built, the customization that we did for them when we first built out their rollup was we were on an Optimism V1 rollup, so we built out a custom ticking feature. This was not done at the node level itself, but we built out a little service to allow the chain to tick every second to support their real-time strategy game, Treaty, which was built on chain. So I think, when we look at it, the core question is how can we make your rollup special? And so we're always thinking about why bother launching a rollup? How can we make this successful? How can we differentiate your product against everything else out there, right? We are not launching general purpose chains. We are launching optimized application-specific rollups because we believe in that thesis. So for Manta Network, who was a speaker earlier, we built out the first, with Celestia team, we built out the first production-ready OP stack integration with Celestia. And of course, Avail's pretty cool as well. So we strongly believe in customizing the chain to make it successful. There's certainly trade-offs, right? We don't think everything should be done at the node level. That can cause issues. Everything should be well tested. But we do think that a certain level of customization at the node level can provide a number of UX and narrative benefits. And other features that we like to talk about is like custom gas token, as Lumoz has as well as like shared sequencing. And there's one other that I forgot about, but mostly these.
Yeah, I agree with him. The whole point of being RaaS provider is to launch app-specific rollups, right? And customization has to be a part of it. Interestingly, so far, many of the projects or clients that we work with, maybe it was bear market speaking, but none of them actually wanted to have their own token there, at least initially. So they wanted to have some sort of a, let's say, Ethereum native wrap here and then use it as a gas token. Maybe that will change now that things are moving up and down. But we have also seen customization at the VM level, but more at the level where you say, hey, I have this fancy crypto library, can I include that as an opcode, stateless precompile in the system, and it will make our job easier. The other thing that we have noticed is people who, especially people who build, I think this was mentioned earlier as well, but people building games, and many of the game builders actually have a very huge contract. What I mean by huge contract is like it consumes a lot of gas. And so they want to make sure that the block gas limit and things like that are customized in a way that could absorb the transaction requirement. And lastly, yes, people like account abstraction because it gives you a lot of features. But one of the base features that account abstraction is used for in many cases is about gasless transactions. And what you've seen is in some cases, some clients have come to us and say, hey, what if I don't have any notion of a gas at all in my network? And basically, the sequencer would pay whatever it has to pay back to the base layer. But I have some mechanism to basically prevent spam. For example, I don't know, imagine something like OpenSea or Uniswap running on top of a layer, and every single time you send a transaction to the app charges you a fee. So that kind of acts like a spam prevention mechanism. But in the end, users don't have to own any gas token at all. So there's no notion of account abstraction. It's just a network with no gas at all. And you can do that simply because it's an app-specific rollup, assuming that you have some mechanism built on top to prevent spam at the application layer. So these are, I would say, some of the customization that we see. And I think we have to support customization.
Cool. And then that's all the question for all the panelists to one-on-one to answer. Like the next part is about spicy questions. So if you find it is too spicy, feel free to skip it. And the first coming up is
Hilmar is here for the spice, you know.
Yeah. And maybe
Bring it on, come on.
Okay, then Amrit, maybe you can start first, from there.
Okay.
Okay, have you ever thought about if one day Optimism, Arbitrum, they're launching a RaaS service themselves?
Look, they could. They definitely could. But I think the main point is about, and they're doing the super chain as well, you would have certain features built in there. But I think it's not necessarily about, and from our perspective, the goal for RaaS eventually is not just being a closed system, because at the moment, the way many of us operate is basically, you have this vendor that runs nodes for you, and they offer you certain integration that could be very useful to you, so you don't have to put all the BD effort and work into getting all those integrations done. But in the end, if you talk to some of these clients, they say, hey, it's great that you run my node at the moment or sequencer at the moment, but what if I want to bring it internally at some point? What if I'm a game builder and I might be working with the likes of Ubisoft and Bandai and whatnot? Can I somehow get them involved in one of my network in some way? So I think RaaS providers eventually, or at least from our perspective, we would like to be a much more open system eventually, where all the RaaS providers, including Optimism, could be competing in that market to offer those services, rather than just being a closed vendor, which becomes a much more closed system. And the moment you become open, you can tap into the ecosystem and network effect that comes from building an open system in blockchain, right? So that ethos still remains.
Cool.
Yeah, when we started the company, we were actually terrified that Optimism was going to compete with us. So this was, back last year summer or something like that, and we had talked with Optimism a couple times, but we were just terrified that they were going to try this in house. And same thing with Arbitrum, actually. And we know for a fact that both of these teams have thought about it, right? It's they have the infra, they own the tech stack. Why wouldn't they try to compete? But I think it's ultimately a different problem. Both Optimism and Arbitrum have thought about doing RaaS themselves, but for example, Arbitrum did Xi, the L3 gaming chain, and found that this was just not a problem that they wanted to solve. So then comes a question of how does Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, maybe some other folks as well working on other roll-up stacks, how do they capture value? And that's a question that everyone's trying to answer right now. Arbitrum with their licensing mechanism for L2s, and Orbit Chain settling on top of Arbitrum, Optimism with the superchain. So I do think this question is still being figured out, but it seems that the answer is these are two different problems. So rather than competing, these roll-up stacks are seeing how they can work together and accrue value, working hand in hand with RaaS providers rather than competing against them.
Well, I think in software you can usually monetize software in two different ways, right? You either license it or you service it and you run the servicing, and there are I think a lot of interesting case studies to look at. If you look at MongoDB and cloud providers, right? You have open source tools that cloud providers like AWS then used and service and actually were able to monetize, and at some point the team that is building the underlying open source tech suddenly decides to change the licensing and make it so that only they can service it anymore, right? So I think there are a lot of cool case studies one can look at and to see how these dynamics play out over time. I think what is interesting with this one is that you have all these framework developers or these frameworks being built right now, and it's not just there's one standard being pushed, right? There are a lot of big teams pushing a lot of standards right now and trying to create these ecosystems around that. And then you have RaaS providers coming in and they want to create the servicing part around it. The great thing about all of this is, of course, that there's competition and there's commoditization. And I personally think that if you talk about licensing fees, right now, of course, it's a lot about ecosystems, and I want to be part in this ecosystem. I want to be part of that ecosystem. I'll get a grant from this ecosystem, right? But I think eventually once you reach a certain size, then this support kind of like deteriorates, right? Or the benefit you get from a certain access maybe deteriorates, and so then it becomes also a question about licensing, like how much fees are you actually like charging me as an application, and why should I pay a fee to you if I'm an application? I'm actually doing heavy work here. Yeah, then we'll see. The cool thing is we have a bunch of frameworks. There's competition around it, so I would argue it will go down over time, and then long term, maybe only a sort of SaaS business model actually makes sense, right? But I think it's too early to speculate on this, and there's a lot of other things that haven't been the case in Web 2, like tokens and network effects potentially around bridges and interoperability layers and these kind of things that still have to play out. So yeah, I think I'm very curious to see how it will end up.
And one more question for you, like why Gelato suddenly decide to like, I'm going to do a RaaS?
Yeah, so why did we decide to do it? Like, we always try to work together with, so we have over 400 projects in the space using our services around 18 different chains, right? And we have been, like, we're always talking very closely to them. One, I think, key part that we realized is that a bunch of these came to us from existing RaaS services and said like, hey, we have our own chain, we need to we want to have Gelato services on our own chain, we want to automate certain things there, and we're like, okay, how can we scale to all these chains suddenly, right? And then we had to build all the infrastructure to actually make very scale. We tested it with also deploying our own rollups and doing that kind of stuff, and realized, hey, the rollup itself is just like a small part of all of the things. So we're like, okay, we can, like, it's very, like, it's not that hard to actually then service the actual rollup itself, and so we believe that this sort of bundled thing is where the actual value will be in the future, and so we decided that, hey, we can also serve, like, we have a better integration with our services and the actual rollup if we have more control over it, and we believe we can provide better customer integrations with that.
Cool. And anyone want to
And by the way, I think more people will come. I think more people will come.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't help but agree on the sense that there's a healthy degree of competition, I would say. So if I tend to focus in our situation, which is really focusing on that ZK aspect for custom scalability, we had a need, right? We needed a decentralized proven network to be able to offer this on demand. Otherwise, rollups are not really rollups, right? They need to be relayed and essentially secured down to a base layer. And if you're not having a decentralized proven network, you're just not able to do it with a ZK framework, right? So we took the leap forward on that regard. And that's something that caught the interest of those architectures, right? But at the same time, it's also no secret in the room, things like the ZK stack from ZK Sync or different architectures that are looking towards this. There's a certain degree of competition, but in the end, it's, I would tend to say, healthy level of competition, because there's multiple overlaps in which platforms like ours can become a middleware for something like a ZK stack, right? Or different instances where you can eventually apply that stack to be able to cater to certain needs. So yeah.
Yeah, I think everything's been covered, but I think the differentiating factors would be in UX, like performance, like Optimism, Arbitrum, they can probably do a great RaaS provider, but I think the rest of the guys here are going to kill in terms of providing the best UX, the one-click deployments, providing customizations per client basis that a big giant like Arbitrum and Optimism probably won't be able to do. You can think of like websites, right? Like Wix has a huge market share because you can go on the website and launch your own custom website in under 60 seconds. So on the RaaS providers, if you can build your own rollup with whatever VM you want, whatever prover you want, and do so in under 5 minutes, that's probably a lot better than going through the Optimism docs and figuring out the 8-hour-long process to even try to get it up. So if the RaaS providers in the world, these guys in front of you, can win the UX battle, then you should be able to beat those big dogs.
Yeah.
Just wanted to close off with this. I think there's an interesting case to think about, which is base. Optimism, Arbitrum, they operate in a very different model compared to, let's say, base, simply because there's a Coinbase behind it. And they also have Coinbase Cloud as a product and whatnot behind it. They could do it if they wanted, but it felt like they do not want to do it. So we spoke with them a couple of times in the past, and the reason was they want to bring integration providers into that rather than build these things themselves. So yes, if I were to bet on Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, others, if one of them would go towards that, that's probably going to be base. But I don't think they will do it.
Okay, cool. Thanks for all answering the first spicy question. And like the second is about the classic pricing model. Like what's your pricing model, and will the price be a race to the bottom? And like, do you provide subsidies for your customers to use your service?
I think everyone here is incentivized to say it's all free, come to us, and
We'll take whatever we can get.
just throw whatever you can to us, and we'll take it.
I'll start it because we're not directly RaaS, we're providing infrastructure for the RaaSes. Our pricing model is like you use execution environment, take a percentage of the transaction fees. Obviously, in the bear market, it's going to be as free as possible, get as many clients, and prove your product. But I'll leave it to the rest of the guys to discuss their pricing models for their rollups themselves.
Yeah, so just quick announcement to the session here. Whatever offer you get from these guys over here, I'll cut it down by 10%, okay? Now, jokes aside, no, it's an interesting concern, right? So understanding pricing, understanding the demand from the project parties that are looking for this kind of solutions is not really a one-size-fits-all, right? And from my point of view, if we're talking about, let's say, initial adoption and stuff, we are looking, of course, on incentivizations from certain use cases, foundations stepping in, etc., of course. But in the end, it's ultimately about understanding the supply and demand here, right? What's the needs of such a product, and what's the advantages that you can eventually obtain from a monetization standpoint, right? And eventually driving that pricing factor towards the client is what we see the most efficient as well.
How spicy shall I make this?
As spicy as you want.
Go for it.
Yeah. I think pricing is, like, I know all of you guys is pricing, right? So I'm actually not undercutting. Like, we are usually charging a premium because we believe our service is premium now. Kidding. I think the pricing is relatively similar for all of us, right? I think all the providers here, they charge like a monthly fixed fee, and then there's like a percentage on the sequencing fee, usually sometimes more, sometimes less. And I think there's definitely already some competition and some offers that I've seen are kind of like questionable in terms of profitability for the actual provider. So I think there will be an equilibrium probably where the prices kind of like settle, which is, hey, this is the operating cost of operating these services. Then there's a certain premium, and where I strongly believe in is kind of like, hey, this sort of bundled solution that you actually need, you want to have all the services actually on top of it. We already have half of the services you actually need, so we can actually provide them to you at a very low marginal cost. So actually, that's how we think, like on a pricing level of the future, we can compete quite a lot. And then of course there is some infrastructure related costs, but I think most of these guys up here, and us included, will outsource some of the more hardware intensive work to like specialists and then borrow it, and then we have the same cost basis. So I think, there will be an equilibrium, and then who has actually the best end-to-end solution will matter a lot. And I think, that's where we are razor focused on.
Yeah, I think there's a very interesting question around like how do RaaSes even capture value, right? I think there's been a lot of discussion about that. But what I'm here to say is that I think we are a VC-backed company, so we are happy to burn cash until, sometime nebulously down the road, maybe we will be profitable. When it comes to pricing model, I think we certainly don't want to necessarily be losing money on like the infrastructure fees. So we do charge like a fixed cut for that. But I think the broader question of like how will RaaSes capture value is an interesting one. At least for us, though, we are not so concerned about pricing model now. Whatever equilibrium we'll get to, based on competition. But people aren't choosing RaaS providers because of how much they charge. So I think for us, we'll just figure it out later.
I think there are 2 points to discuss here. One is the base cost of running the infra. Okay, that's the one component. And the second component is you can't put a tag on or price tag on the integration that comes with it, right? For example, hey, I want to have access to Gelato. I want to have a certain Oracle service. If you had your own team and if you wanted to go and do the BD work to get that done, it's going to take you ages. Just getting a call is going to take you ages. So I think it's very difficult to put a price on that bit. The second thing is, of course, is the model where you say, hey, if I give you only a fixed price, right? You need, as a RaaS provider, you need to get a lot of clients, right? Before you can start making money, not in the VC sense of things, but a real money where you're not burning cash right away. And so you end up having some sort of a revenue share, some sort of a sequencing fee model that you bake in so that it makes it easier for you to do that. And from a app perspective, that may not be ideal in many cases. You'd say, you know what, I'm just starting. I don't even have money. I may not even be generating even enough revenue. How I'm going to give you, I don't know, whatever percentage of my sequencing revenue. And this is again where the underlying SDK can be helpful, right? Because in the end, we are, as a RaaS providers, are the distribution partners for the underlying SDK provider, right? And if people are here, we encourage the SDK providers to also provide support to RaaS builders as well, because in the end, they provide service back to the ecosystem as well. So hopefully, I think we'll come to a point where things would become much more reasonable. But yeah, at some point, you have to understand that RaaS providers, of course, have to base cost. That base cost may not be heavy if you're not running a ZK client, but there's a certain cost for the BD work, and I think that's where the heavy lifting actually happens behind the scenes.
Cool. And the next question is about the service partners. Like most RaaS service have service partners. I don't know if you choose partners based on their branding or you have more sophisticated like criteria. What's your evaluation process?
Partners as in clients or partners as in?
Service partners, like for example, Oracle's Bridgings.
Oh, okay.
So for us, it's very clear. It's based on what the users need. It's based on what the clients need, based on what the developer teams need. And this is something that we were iterating and learning on the way on our first testnet. And we're having different clients, different applications that were like, oh, well, we were looking for account abstraction. We're looking for API indexing. We want an Oracle, but this Oracle doesn't work because we're looking for retroactive fitting for this or that, right? So it really depends on case-by-case basis. But what we've been coming to a conclusion is that eventually looking at service providers as basically a profile that's providing the service to the client, and through us, basically, it's a win-win-win situation, right? In the sense of the client receiving the service that he was looking for, the service providing having a new vertical for potential client acquisition, and us being able to support this kind of service as well. If you're looking for a certain degree of customization within that custom rollup as well, right? So we're not too picky in terms of the branding of the different service providers. It's more about the feasibility and the use cases that can be provided or solved for different developer teams.
Spicy.
Yeah, how spicy should I make it? That's the everlasting question for me. So I think over the long run, I think we will see that there's certain middleware services, how I like to call them, that you need. And probably over time, what will happen is there will be one or two winners, and there will be the ones that will provide the best possible service usually. And so I think right now we are still in this post-VC bubble period of 1,000 infrastructure companies, and we have 10 for each, which is great. It's great for innovation, and it's great for the applications. But I think it will converge down. And what's my dream here is, my dream is that I can talk to a project. I'm like, you have everything here, and you don't need to understand the differences between an Avail or a Celestia or this or that you anyways don't do, because you make the decision based on marketing and what you have heard, right? This is how usually the brain works, or at least how people make decisions. And of course, sometimes it's different. Sometimes people actually spend a lot of time. But if the differences are have intricacies, right? It's a lot of time. So I think RaaS providers will, what we want to do is we of course very open to work together with all service providers, but we want to make sure that our customers get the best and that we help them select the best out there to service their particular needs. And I think this will eventually converge down to just a few.
Yeah, that's quite compelling. I think, yeah, Gelato is a great product. I've heard a lot of good things about Gelato's product. I think somewhat underrated right now is that we're pretty early. So a lot of infrastructure providers, a lot of the bigger brands don't really have their stuff set up in order to support app chain so easily. Like Gelato supports 80, they're great, right? But some of the other, say Bridges, you ask them, hey, can you add my chain as an endpoint?
And then they quote you 250K.
Yeah.
And go through a governance proposal that takes ages.
Yeah, so it's depending on the category of infrastructure, or for example, Etherscan is a bit notorious. I think we've all talked to the Etherscan team about, hey, can you
please lower your prices, Etherscan. Please lower your prices.
Right. So somewhat underrated is that we are quite early. Who's going to work with your chain? And for that, there are a number of teams that are quite on top of things, who have their infrastructure set up a little better. And that's all I have to add to this discussion. This is a pretty lukewarm take, but just just consider who's going to be able to support your project easily?
Yeah, I think my answer is very, very similar to being said earlier. So basically, everyone wants Chainlink, but you can't get that, right? It's not as simple as that. One is you have to put some money on the table in different ways, and two is it's going to take time because they already have support. They want to support different L1s, and they don't have it, right? And that's the one reason. The second thing, it's not very. They don't have a scalable model built, so it's not a permission model where you can go and hey. I have many of these RaaS providers actually have a dashboard as well. So you want, ideally, as a RaaS provider, you want some sort of a SDK that you can put in and have that. Oh, I click a button, then I have a Gelato set up for me. I have this bridge set up for me and all that. And that's not, many providers don't have that service. So ideally, you want someone, this partner, to have some sort of permissionless system that you can use directly in your service. Otherwise, it becomes much more difficult to integrate. And also, it's not realistic when people come and ask and say, hey, can I get this service? But sorry, you can't because it's going to take, one, it's going to take you a lot of money, and two, it's going to take a lot of time, and maybe they're not even interested. And so we need more permissionless system that allows people to, yeah, you can bake whatever fees you want behind the scenes, but ideally, and bridges is a really good example. If you go back, I don't know, a year ago, all these bridges were operating in a model where you have to go through a governance proposal and you say, hey, here's this fancy new chain that I want to add, and then on this fancy new chain, I have this fancy new token that I want to add. And then you keep going through, 2 rounds of temperature check and then 1 round of final voting, and then eventually, if you're lucky, you will get through. You need something that is much more permissionless. And by the way, there are solutions out there, but you need much more of those services that are much more easier for people to integrate.
I have a spicy fun fact. So Chainlink typically costs like millions of dollars to integrate. There's actually a way to use Hyperlane to get off-chain signatures from Chainlink for free in your rollup. And we managed to integrate that. So I hope no one from Chainlink's in the crowd. But there's a way to get around it. Just look up the Hyperlane Chainlink integration. But long story short, there are cool ways within the modular thesis to use these different components to find sneaky ways to get these infrastructure partners in. But yeah, if you're looking for oracles, check out the Chainlink integration. Free Chainlink.
Wow, that's a hot take.
I'm going to get sued by Chainlink.
Yeah, and my final question is when a rollup developer comes to this space, and what would be his common obstacles launching a new rollup? And also it's the last 5 minutes, so if you want to challenge each other on the stage, feel free to start.
From a rollup developer that's looking to build their own rollup.
Yes, what's their common questions or obstacles they're facing?
The main obstacle that I think I've seen is that they have no clue what they're getting themselves into. They think, oh, yeah, I want my rollup, and then I'll build my rollup, and that's it. Okay. But there's so many new verticals that you can look at. It's not only customization, it's what type of architecture it is, what we were just touching a moment ago, right? Between Avail or Celestia, right? Understanding all those different components and really understanding it and what's the features. It's a bit of an underestimation in terms of what's the vast opportunity of things that you can actually do and the knowledge that it can actually require. So yeah, that's what I've seen the most.
Okay, so will you educate them about this?
And that's part of our solution as well, right?
Yeah.
I think a few players were mentioning it on the stage today, but since it's so early days, we see that a bit of educational support in terms of helping them understand what may be the best choice. And providing that consulting is very often where we end up into.
I don't have a spicy tip, more of a banter to Gelato guys. We were speaking with some of the team members one day and say, hey guys, there's a DeFi project wants to use this. Do you have any plans on integrating? And next day I hear they're building a RaaS service. So just a fun story. Now I triggered the.
No, I think
dragon.
We have been thinking about it for a long time, so it's nothing that came out of the blue while talking to anyone. I think we've been looking into rollups for a year or so, but of course had a lot of other services that we are building, and so under the hood we've been building this for quite some time, and of course it takes a bit of time to really have the whole infrastructure set up and everything. But yeah, I think all of these guys are building some great products, and I heard only good things. So I think we are in a very healthy state of the ecosystem right now, and projects have a bunch of cool customers to infrastructure providers to choose from launching their own rollups. But yeah, I think if you really want an end-to-end solution, I think you have to really realize that it's not only the rollup that matters here. There's all these different things, and we heard like Chainlink quoting horrendous pricing and these kind of things. So you need to find systems that provide you with like a package that makes sense for you at a reasonable price. And I think this is what matters for the projects and what will save you time. And yeah, don't sell your soul to Chainlink.
I'd say for us, at least the biggest problem that we see is just differentiating your rollup. Why build a rollup at all? You know, people have been launching chains for ages to various degrees of success. Like, how are you gonna make your rollup stand out, right? App rollups are the hot narrative now, but before that, there was like Polkadot parachains, Cosmos app chains, right? App chains are not new. And the age-old question of how can I make my rollup different is still something that you got to answer for yourself, and we'll do our best to help. But ultimately, that's it.
I think it's just a minute, Mark.
Oh, just a minute. Aside from that, I would say the other one would be just like getting liquidity onto your chain. How do you make the TVL go up?
Okay, any more want to answer this question?
I think if you're building something in space, build it in a way that could be integrated in other places as well. So build it in a modular way, build it in a way which is accessible and permissionless. If you put all sorts of obstacles, no one is going to use it, sadly. One, it becomes painful for us to use, and then it becomes painful for anyone else behind us to use. And so make it, whatever you're building, any infra services, make it in a way that you feel, and again, it doesn't mean that you can't make money through those systems. I mean, assuming you'll have users at one point. Yeah, you can make your fees and whatnot, but make it in a way that it's easier for people to come and use.
Okay, thanks for all answering all the questions, and like feel free to battle off the stage. And yeah, thank you.